All right, today we're talking about understory trees. Hopefully, does anyone not get this reference? Nice, good. I think some of you are lying. All right, does anyone really quickly want to define for me like what the understory is? What is an understory tree?
Trees that grow in the understory.
Nice, yeah. Using the word in the definition, classic.
Like 10 to 20 feet? Or, I don't know, 5 to 10?
Yeah, so generalize that. It's just stuff that's below, like, the yeah, the understory is below the overstory. Yeah, so the overstory being the top of the forest canopy that's the initial, like, interceptor of sunlight. And then everything below that is going to be the understory. But a forest is comprised, and we're gonna tie this into a home landscape. I just want to give you more of an appreciation for the smaller trees that we're encountering. And eventually we're gonna talk about like 4 specific species of viburnum that you probably encounter with some regularity. Want you to be able to identify them and understand why they're valuable. All right, so 4 forest layers. We have the overstory, or the general canopy. That's going to be our oaks, hickories, beech. Sometimes those can be in the understory for a little while as they're waiting for an opening, especially beech. You know, you can see saplings that might be decades old that are only, like 20, 30 feet tall. Then we have the subcanopy, or the understory. So that's above the forest floor, but below that main upper portion. Shrubs and forbs, which is just a fancy word of saying flowering plants that aren't grass. And all of these layers are really important in terms of maintaining a living biome. Animals make use of each of those layers. They might be adapted to living at like a particular level, and we need that food that's available at kind of each level, the habitat options that are available. But then, as gardeners and landscapers, those understory plants are oftentimes what become most visually arresting because it's at eye level. You think about where a tulip poplar flowers, really pretty flowers, but you only see them once they've fallen and they're on the ground. And so these understory trees, viburnums, dogwoods, help me out. Redbud, American fringe tree. What are some others? Sourwood.
Mulberry.
What was that?
Mulberry.
I kind of think maybe in some circumstances, serviceberry.
Red maple. Where would you put a red maple?
I feel like they oftentimes persist for a while in the understory, but then don't do super well. In general, understory trees are going to be pretty shade adapted in order to kind of persist. That's going to be a quality they all have. The understory, interestingly, it provides food at different times for animals than the overstory. Typically, the overstory is going to be more of the fall and early winter, and the understory is going to be summer to late summer. And so it's important for a continuity of foraging opportunities for animals. And then, yeah, that wow factor. If you think about dogwoods, they have attractive flowers, the leaves are interesting, the bark is interesting. The same is true for a lot of these other smaller trees. So from a gardening perspective, not only does it kind of service the Doug Tallamy ideal of having a home environment that creates like a micro habitat for displaced animals, as we continue to develop our forests, develop in terms of like commercial development, clear cutting, thinning out, our yards become more and more important for maintaining pockets of habitat for local wildlife. And then also for plants too, as they have less and less area to inhabit. And then, so I reached out to Catherine and I asked her to give her her take on why these things are important. And she gave me a really lovely paragraph. So I'm just gonna read that really quick and imagine me as with the energy of Catherine Bollinger. Native understory species in a garden landscape offer an essential forest layer that local fauna evolved to expect, and their diverse array of forms, flowers, and fruits provide the aesthetic appeal that human gardeners seek. Just please remember that understory trees and shrubs will never be happy plunked in the middle of a sunny, irrigated, and over-fertilized lawn by themselves. They are forest edge dwellers that require afternoon shade and mulched ground that they share with members of the other 3 forest layers common to our Piedmont forests. And So when people are bemoaning their inability to grow grass because there's too much shade, one of the things they can do to fill in for visual interest are planting these understory trees. So it's good to recognize them where they're already in a yard, and then maybe even know a few that we can suggest as planting options if someone's like really struggling to enjoy the shade they have in their yard. All right. So I want to get into some of the specific trees that you might find in the understory, and let's have some guesses. What do we think this little sapling is?
Maple leaf viburnum.
God damn it. You were supposed to say red maple, and you're supposed to be wrong. But yes, you were correct, Julius. What's that?
Red maple.
Thank you. Yeah, Chase, red maple, idiot. So we're going to be talking, next week we're going to get a little bit more into 4 specific species that are common enough that I think you've probably seen all of them, 2 of which are really common in yards. So this is the maple leaf viburnum, or Viburnum acerifolia, and acerifolium. And there are a lot of non-native viburnums, and they're not going to have the same benefit to wildlife because they don't have those evolutionary relationships with the insects in plants. But so we're going to focus on the native ones, but there are plenty of others. So initially today, I at least want to give you 3 ways to identify the genus. So we're not going to get into the specific species, and how to differentiate it from other understory trees that are going to have some similar characteristics. So the first one is opposite leaves. Of course, that's a character trait that's going to be shared by dogwoods. And so that moves us into our second key for identifying viburnums. They have toothed leaf margins. So dogwoods have a smooth leaf margin. So one of the ways that you can double check to see if you're looking at a dogwood or something else, because particularly Viburnum prunifolium, or is John here? I can't remember the common name for Viburnum prunifolium. Black haw, thank you. Yeah, black haw viburnum. It's going to have, and also looks a lot like black cherry, the leaves do. So from black cherry, you differentiate it by looking for the opposite arrangement of the leaves. And from dogwood, you'll look for the serrated or toothed leaf margin. And then the final one, which is really only relevant like right now, which is why I kind of wanted to cover it, is the flower morphology. So in the previous photo, you might be, I would forgive you for thinking this is red maple. There are a couple ways in which you would distinguish it, but just visually it looks remarkably similar. But here we have the flower in the middle. It hasn't completely opened yet, but they're white flowers. But red maple flowers are really diminutive, kind of small, like hang down. They don't really look like flowers. This is what botanists would call a cyme, which is a really particular type of inflorescence. Here's sort of a view of the flower structure from below. So you can see it's multiple branching kind of florets almost. And all of the viburnums share this same flower structure. And is this the Korean spice viburnum?
This cultivar is called Nantucket.
Nantucket. But
I don't know what the species is.
so not a native viburnum, but it's still useful. We have our opposite leaves there. And the flowers are kind of past their prime, but we can still see the structure. It looks similar to an umbel or an umbrella-shaped flower, but botanically there's some key differentiations, but we're not going to worry too much about that. So take a look at that. This is arrowwood viburnum, or Viburnum raffinesquianum. This one's really, really common, and it's just wrapping up flowering. And so you'll see, and then Viburnum prunifolium, you'll still see the fruits are attached to this structure. So even if it's not in flower, you'll still see this structure with some kind of like capsules on it. And thank you. So the typical way of remembering opposite leaves is mad horse, right? Maple, ash, dogwood, horse chestnut, or buckeyes. What in North America we more commonly refer to horse chestnuts, or the genus Aesculus as. So I want to add viburnums to that to help you remember. And so I've added, but I couldn't figure out a way to use the V, but Burnum, viburnum, Burnham's mad horse is how I propose we remember that. And keep in mind, there are a lot of plants with opposite leaf arrangement. They're just typically shrubs. But for trees, these are, so in other words, the opposite leaves, opposite buds, opposite branches, there are other plants that are going to have those, but for trees, these are the most common. And then why do you think when the leaf arrangement is opposite, why, just getting into a little bit of biology here, why is the branch arrangement also opposite? Why are those two things similar?
Branches start at leaf buds.
Yeah, so branches come from buds. The axillary buds, so the buds between the stem and the leaf, are where new branches form. So it's pretty incredible. Just to put a finer point on this in biology, all of the individual parts of a tree, the above ground parts of a tree, originate within these buds. The leaves, the flowers, branches, all of this is just being vomited into existence by a bud. It's particularly notable on these. I love watching the painted buckeyes emerge because these buds are really fat, but once they open, it is just like, how was all of that compacted into this tiny space? And so the growing point in that bud is called the apical meristem. And that meristem is about the size of a pinhead. And yet it generates like all of this new tissue. A tree's entire structure is emerging from this tiny little point of cell division that's contained in this bud. Of course, as it gets fat, that's a separate meristematic layer, the secondary meristem that's in the cambium. So yeah, branches come from buds. And I like to think of it as this kind of like magic show as you watch trees expand. So anyways, next week we'll get a little bit more into 4 specific native viburnums that I think are valuable to be able to recognize.
Awesome.
All right, so last week we started talking about understory trees, and I'm just going to quickly review what I feel like are the most salient points before we move on. So the reason why we might be interested in understory trees, like in an urban setting or a more of a manufactured or a built environment, is because if someone's kind of like into this idea that their yard can be a refuge for wildlife or pollinators, Catherine Bollinger talks a lot about this, but there's 3 kind of primary levels to the forest: the canopy, the subcanopy, and then like lower plants and shrubs, all of which help to create this kind of like layered birthday cake of food and habitat, and each layer being really important. And then also from kind of less of that mindset, if someone doesn't really care about that, we might make the argument that the understory trees kind of bring some of the aesthetic values of plants to eye level. So they're going to be some of the showier, tulip poplar flowers you're most likely going to see on your car if you park underneath one. I had a couple on my window this morning, or on the ground. Oaks don't really produce showy flowers. They're more of these like catkins that a lot of people might not even recognize as flowers. But these understory trees put flowers, interesting bark, interesting branching patterns at eye level. We're going to see them. So, and it's nice to be able to know what some of the native ones are, to be able to push people towards those, because again, they're just going to be more productive in terms of this other thing, the creating refuge, habitat and foraging potential for local insects, birds, and other animals. And we've been kind of on a viburnum kick. If you remember, like I've suggested Bo Burnham's Mad Horse. Now, keep in mind, there are going to be other things that have opposite branching when you get into the smaller plants that are sometimes shrubs. And also, just as another reminder, there's not a scientific definition for what a tree is. If you, there's a really great anecdote at the beginning of applied tree biology where there's this court case going on in England where they have to establish like what is a tree specifically. And what the judge concluded was like, if you walk up to it and you think, that's a tree, it's a tree. And that's what this like high level kind of research-based book went with as their definition of a tree. So with these viburnums, sometimes they're going to look really shrubby, but every once in a while, you'll see one with like a really nice kind of dogwood-esque structure where they will obviously be more tree-like. But for our purposes, I'm just treating them as understory trees. All right. So we're mainly just going to focus on some identification, and then there's also one other understory tree that's flowering all over that I want to introduce you to an exotic variant and then our native variant, so you can recognize the difference between those two easily. Okay, so what do we feel about that on your left? We thinking viburnum, or is that going to be something else? It is an understory tree. It's got serrated leaf margins. What do we think? Oh, here, let's really quickly, what are the keys to viburnum identification? Opposite leaves, toothed leaf margins, and then the flower morphology is going to be this kind of, we called it a cyme, but it's sort of a rounded globe of flowers. So those are our 3 distinguishing characteristics that should get you to viburnum pretty reliably if we're looking at native plants.
Something else.
Alternate, yeah. I don't remember exactly, but that might be Ilex decidua or what's the common name for Ilex decidua?
Possum paw holly.
Possum haw holly. Yeah, I believe that's a native holly. Okay, how about this on the right?
Something else.
Something else. Yeah, and the something else comes from wrong flower structure. It's more of a long raceme, and then alternate leaves, right? So even if we don't know what that is, which it's a black cherry, but even if we didn't know what that is, we'd be able to say it's not a viburnum. All right, now on the left, those leaves look pretty similar to those leaves. A little bit lighter, but morphologically pretty dang similar. What do you think?
Gives an rusty black paw.
So Craig's saying it's a viburnum.
Oh, right.
So yeah, so genus viburnum, and I believe this is actually viburnum prunifolium. But I'll kind of get to the difference on those two in a second. Yeah, so opposite, and sometimes it can be kind of difficult depending on how the leaves are splayed on a twig to tell if they are alternate or like whorled or if they're opposite. So remember, opposite leaves are always going to occur on trees that also have opposite branching because branches and leaves all come from buds. So clearly we have opposite branching there. We know it's not a dogwood. Does anyone want to tell me why we know it's not a dogwood?
Leaf margin.
Yeah. So what do dogwoods have? Yeah, in smooth or like entire would be the botanical term, leaf margins. And then I just want to, so this is Viburnum raffinesquianum or arrowwood leaf viburnum or downy arrowwood viburnum, I think. So it has more of that toothed leaf margin, but that's more of a, I like to take close-up shots. It's really hard to take good pictures of understory trees typically because there's like a lot of stuff behind them that obscures like the actual structure. But this is one that's now set fruit. And so you're not going to see the flower, but you will see this. So the fruit kind of maintains the flower structure. It's capsules that are still going to be on this like interesting kind of branched cyme. All right. What do we feel like here? I know Julius knows this.
That is an overstory.
What's that? Are these two the same thing?
No.
On the left and the right? All right, Craig, what would you say about these two?
The way I discovered the maple leaf viburnum is I thought it was a maple, then I felt it, and it felt fuzzy.
You felt the felty qualities.
And then I can just see that
Yeah.
one's not going to feel fuzzy on the right.
Yeah, so I wish I had kind of some actual leaves for you, but a maple leaf is going to be more glabrous or smooth, and the viburnum leaf is going to have a thicker kind of feltier quality. And then of course, if the flower is present, the maple flowers don't look anything like that. So that's a good tell.
That looks like it'd be an awesome, like, kind of did you know opportunity for a client, because to a layperson, they're going to say that's the exact same thing.
Unfortunately, I've only seen this on one person's property. Yeah, of the viburnums, this is probably that I know, and I just discovered one on Friday that I didn't know about that's a native viburnum using that key. I saw a leaf, I didn't recognize, I was like, oh, it's opposite. Oh, the leaves are toothed. I bet this is a viburnum. And then I did some work, and sure enough, it was a viburnum I hadn't discovered before. So that key I think is pretty good. All right, now the bark is also really fun with some of these viburnums. So here on the left, we have two different trees. But look how similar that is. I know one's out of focus, but so in the foreground, what do you think that might be? This is kind of hard. I might just, okay, so in the foreground, that's actually a viburnum, and I believe this is rusty black haw. We'll get to that in a second. In the background, that's actually an ash.
Which one is the background? Which one is the foreground?
So foreground is slightly more in focus. Yeah, background a little bit blurrier. So yeah, pretty similar bark. And then over on the right, what do we feel about that?
No. I know this. This is a
Is that persimmon?
persimmon. Yeah. No.
Oof. Back to the books, Craig.
Is it a black gum, a dogwood, or a cherry?
You said it in there. Yeah,
Okay, that's my answer though.
it's a
It's an oak maple.
yeah, it's an oak maple. Yeah, it's a maple oak. That's a dogwood. So we've got an ash here, a dogwood here. Yeah, persimmon. You know, you might even think that like a sourwood looks vaguely similar. In the middle is a larger version of this. So this is rusty black haw, but I believe rusty black haw is the viburnum that I usually see in a tree form most often. I don't oftentimes see viburnums with stems that big, but I have seen, I can't remember which ones, but other viburnums do kind of have this bark pattern. I don't know if they all do because, again, it's just not very common to see them get very large.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. All right, yeah, so there's our dogwood leaf. That's from the same tree as that bark. So you can see the smooth margins there. And then it's downy arrowwood viburnum in the middle, which you have a good chance of seeing on a property. This is more of a macro view. On the right, more of a shrubby habit, but that's kind of like what it looks like, the whole thing in focus with some flowers. This is rusty black haw. The leaf is going to be very similar to possum haw viburnum, but the reason why it's called rusty black haw is if you take a close look at the midrib on the underside of the vein, you're going to see these reddish hairs, and it's also going to have a glossier, thicker leaf than and I think this might be my favorite aesthetically of our native viburnums, also because it just gets a little bit bigger and more tree-like. So really quickly, I'm going to try to fit this in. We have two Cheonanthus or fringe trees. We have a native one and there's an exotic one. Both are relatively common, I've realized recently, as they're all in flower. I see them everywhere. There's a very easy way to tell the two from a difference with one simple trick that doctors hate. And does anyone want to take a guess which is the Chinese and which is the American? The right one is... yeah, the right one. Why do you think the right one is Chinese?
Bigger and more showy.
Bigger and more showy. Okay, so the reason why you might think it's more showy is that it flowers on the current year's growth. So the flowers are going to be at the edge of the canopy. On the American fringe tree, you're going to have 1 year's growth of, or at least the current season's growth is going to extend out in front of the flowers. So the flowers are a little bit more interior to the canopy. So there's a little bit of closer view of that. It's easy to tell them from a distance once I learned that. The last point of interest here is that the American fringe tree, the leaf tapers to a fairly sharp point, and the Chinese fringe tree, it's more of a kind of like a fatter, blunted tip. It doesn't come to a point. And that is it.